Welcome to Movie Oubliette, the film review podcast for movies that most people have mercifully forgotten.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Conrad, and in each episode, we drag a forsaken film out of the oubliette,
Discuss it and judge it to decide whether it should be set free
or whether it should be thrown back and consigned to oblivion forever. Others tend to forget. Come with us and open up the movie Oubliette.
Childhood nostalgia! Hello and welcome to the movie Oubliette. I always stumble on that word, even though it's the title of our podcast. So this is a podcast where we drag some forgotten and often quite weird films out of obscurity, and we bring it into the light and review it to see if it should be set free into the world or thrown back into the dungeons.
To be forgotten forever.
Yes, indeed.
So, how are you, Dan?
I am much better than previous weeks. How are you, Conrad?
I'm very well. Yes, and very excited to be doing our first ever nostalgia episode.
Childhood nostalgia.
Oh, yes. Childhood nostalgia and also fantasy as well. Our first fantasy film to be reviewed in this podcast.
Yes, that's right. So instead of horror, which we've done a couple of times, and sci-fi, we're still in the 80s, but yes, in a slightly different genre. So I guess you better go and pull that sucker out of the oubliette.
Ah, yes. One moment, please. Just over by the oubliette.
Indeed.
Got it. Right, close it. Why is that trapdoor so far away from our studio?
Well, for health and safety, I think.
Yes, so today we will be reviewing Willow, which is a 1988 film from memory.
It is. It is. It's a 1988 movie from the Lucasfilm stable, no less, which is interesting because you kind of think that Lucasfilm is a powerhouse because of what it's become, you know, a subsidiary of Disney and churning out a Star Wars movie every 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. But in fact, in its 45 years, I was looking, it's only actually produced about 25, 26 movies.
Oh, right.
So you think that, you know, it's churning out lots of things we remember from our childhood, but really not.
So this film was directed by Ron Howard.
Ron Howard, who I have mixed feelings about as a director.
Yeah, I have to admit, I haven't seen a lot of his films.
No.
I've seen, you know, a bunch of his 80s stuff because I grew up in the 80s. But apart from that, I haven't really seen a huge amount of his film catalogue.
Yeah. Well, Apollo 13, I would imagine you've seen.
I only saw that recently, actually.
Really? Wow.
And was amazed by it. It's a fantastic movie.
It really is, yeah. It's one where, people thought, wow, Ron Howard's a real player.
Yeah.
But then other people pointed out that story is just so inherently good that it would have taken a really, really sucky director to screw up Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks.
That has happened with some very good stories, so it's
true.
It's not uncalled for. I didn't know this, but Ron Howard started off his film career as an actor.
Yeah, Happy Days.
Oh, right. I didn't.
Yeah.
I never watched Happy Days.
No, see, it's before my time, really. But yeah, he was in everybody's all Americans' living rooms every week on Happy Days with the Fonz, and he was the main character.
Right, I didn't know that.
Yes,
interesting.
Yeah, he was Richie Cunningham, so he was an actor first and foremost, and then started directing things with Splash, which has a fantasy element,
The only thing I remember from him is Cocoon, which I've seen many times.
which again is primarily a drama but with a fantasy element.
Yeah,
But here he went full bore fantasy.
he did.
And he hasn't really returned to that genre since, except, of course, now he's going to be directing, or he has directed, or rescued, is probably a more accurate description, the new Star Wars movie.
Right,
Which
yes.
is coming out soon. Maybe by the time this pod comes out, it's been and gone.
Oh, yeah.
So, yes, he has returned to the Lucasfilm stable to direct a science fiction fantasy adventure. So that's only the second time he's done it.
All right. Back to Willow. This film was it written by George Lucas?
Yeah, I think he came up with the story. I think he was doing a thing that he did on Star Wars. After he directed Star Wars, which he wrote and directed, he sort of wrote the story and then handed it over to somebody else and said, right, you turn this into a script and somebody else direct it
Okay.
and I'll produce. But, I mean, he was a creative force to be reckoned with
Yeah.
in terms of all the decisions that were made.
Okay, yeah.
And it stars the dream team of Warwick Davis, Val Kilmer, Joanne Whalley, and Jean Marsh. So it's an interesting cast.
For me, as a non-Brit, the only person I knew was Val Kilmer in that cast.
Yes. Yes.
And I do know Warwick Davies from other things, and his recent thing he did with Ricky Gervais. That's him, right?
It is,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
So Warwick Davis, he has an interesting career because he started off very young playing Wicket W. Warwick in Return of the Jedi, where he proved to be a fine physical actor.
Yeah.
And able to bring that character to life through layers of fake fur. And so was given a leading role, although he's not top billed, he comes third.
Yeah.
But he is the main character in this movie.
He was also in Labyrinth as well as a goblin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all the Harry Potter movies, I think he's Professor Flitwick in that, and various other characters I think he plays. And I think he's in many of the Star Wars
Yeah,
movies.
as different characters each
As
time.
different characters, yeah, in some suit or another. So he's had a very prolific career.
He was also in the Leprechaun movies, which I haven't seen any of, but he's in
I
all
haven't
of them.
seen any of. I don't know. Are they down there in the Oubliette?
They could be. They could be right all the way down there, though.
Should we shout and find out? Hey, Leprechaun, are you in there?
So the other actors, Val Kilmer obviously is the most famous, and I didn't know who Joanne Whalley was.
No, and she came out of British stage and TV dramas, and she'd been in a few movies prior to that, I think.
Yeah.
She went on to appear in several other films with Val Kilmer because, of course, they got married.
Yeah,
They fell in love on the set of this movie.
Yeah, I read about that. But then they divorced in 1996.
They did. So she was 96. Yeah, they had a couple of kids though, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So yeah, she was Joanne Whalley Kilmer for quite some time. She was double-barreled,
Right.
like Courtney Cox Arquette.
Yes, and the other ones that I can't think
The
of
other
right
one
now.
that you can't bring to mind. Yeah, so it's an interesting cast, all sort of at the beginning of their careers, I guess.
Yeah.
Because the main focus of this, I suppose, is the special effects and the story, which I guess we should try to summarize.
Before we get into that, just one last thing. I found it really impressive as well, and interesting, and also surprising that the lead character is a little person.
Yes, which hasn't been done very often. I think Time Bandits is one of the few other examples I can think of.
Yeah, I can't think of any others.
No, I mean, I think of supporting characters. Peter Dinklage did a great turn in,
Of course.
In Bruges, and is a great character in Game of Thrones, despite his slightly dodgy British accent. Bless him. It's good though; it's fun to listen to. And he's a great actor. And I don't know, did Vern Troyer ever have a lead role? God rest him.
I don't know who that is.
Vern Troyer, so he was Mini-Me
Oh,
in the
yes,
Austin
of
Powers
course.
movies, and
Yeah.
he passed recently, sadly.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, The only one I can think of is Peter Dinklage. He has been in other movies where he has been the main character. Like I think he was in The Station Agent,
Okay.
which is a pretty good film actually.
I haven't seen that.
Anyway, so the plot of Willow. It is a bit confusing, the plot. I did find the plot confusing, a little bit confusing. So there is an evil queen,
Yep.
and she's evil and rules the world, the land,
Apparently.
the whole land. And there's a prophecy that a baby is gonna be born and overthrow her reign, as it seems. And so she goes around killing all babies.
Yeah, she goes full King Herod
Yeah.
and just starts killing babies.
Killing all babies. And there's this one baby that has this mark that I guess symbolizes the chosen one. And that baby gets rescued and whisked away by the midwife. And then a chase ensues. And then the baby is put on a conveniently placed grass raft, and then floats down.
Just happens to be there.
Floats down.
really handy.
Floats downstream, and is discovered by our main character, Willow.
Yes, who is a little person and lives in a village of little people, and
I think they're
Has
called
to-
they're called Nelwyns
Nelwyns. Yes,
in the film.
and they have to. They do, after the village comes under threat from external forces looking for the baby, they decide to send him out. Initially, just to get rid of the thing. I think just go to the nearest crossroad for normal-sized
People.
people.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that. I should say average-sized people.
Yeah.
Who are called daikinis.
Yeah, I like
And
that
they're sort of.
name.
That's quite a nice name, isn't it? Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of something you would add in a stir fry or something.
Yeah. Or a cocktail. I'll have a daikini. So they go to a crossroads basically to give the baby away, and a whole series of adventure ensues. That's where he meets Val Kilmer, who is sellsword, who is in a crow cage left behind to rot because he's disgraced himself in some way. And they end up giving him the baby, but then the baby's captured, and then they'd have to chase to rescue the baby. And
A series of events follows, finding some sorcerer, and then she's needed to defeat the evil queen, and then many battles. Shall we go into spoilers?
I think we can go into spoilers.
And then they defeat the queen, and she gets whisked off into the clouds as a
Indeed.
as a red cloud of blood.
Yeah. The happy ending everyone
Yeah.
wants. And Willow gets a magic book and
Everyone gets nice, clean clothes and new hairdos.
new hairdos and a new costume, and they live happily ever after.
Yeah. The end.
So that's basically the plot, and it's sort of George Lucas applying the same Campbell story theory approach that he did in Star Wars.
Yeah.
So you could say that you have a hero, and he has a quest, and he has to learn something about himself, and he has characters that help him and characters that hinder him.
Yeah.
And an evil character that has to be defeated. And we can talk about some of the parallels with Star Wars when we go into discussing and reviewing the film.
Yes.
Yep, we'll be right back. So Dan, we picked this one. We've both seen it. It's like a childhood nostalgia special.
Childhood nostalgia.
I remember the film pretty well. You thought you remembered the film pretty well, but then you watched it and had a slightly different experience.
Yeah, so I thought I'd seen this film many times as a kid, but I didn't quite recall it. So when I put it in the DVD player, push play, I thought, oh wow, yeah, it's all coming back. And then after 5 minutes into the film, everything was brand new and I didn't remember any of it. So yeah, I guess maybe either I completely forgot it as a easily distracted child, or I just hadn't seen it at all.
No, or saw the opening scene with the baby and floating down the river.
And then just went away and played in a sandpit or something.
Yeah. Fell asleep. Where should we start? Should we talk about the plot of the movie? I mean, I was sort of hinting before at the similarities with Star Wars. And if I sort of describe to you a young man who works on a farm, comes into possession of a small person who is very important to the defeat of the most evil person that rules over the land, and goes on a series of adventures and has a wise, cracking guy who might be helping him but might just be selfish. And a sorcerer, and he wants to learn the ways of sorcery, but he's not sure whether he's going to be any good at it. And you'd hear bells ringing, I think.
I mean, when I watched it, I did pick out similarities between Willow and Star Wars. I also picked out a lot of similarities between Willow and Lord of the Rings as well.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's interesting.
Which is also about a small person going on a quest and being, completely, no one has any faith in, this little person being able to overthrow this big evil force, which is very similar to Lord of the Rings. And even some of the scenes where he gets that, when he meets up with that fairy goddess thing.
Shalindria,
Yeah, very similar to in Lord of the Rings, where he talks to the elfin queen.
Yeah, Galadriel.
Which also has a very similar look to her, very glowing white, bluey hues. A lot of similarities between Star Wars and Lord of the Rings.
And that's his whole the whole theory behind it was that he looked at the Campbell's theory that most stories share these common elements and that you could break them down and codify them. So he took that and then created the story of Star Wars to match that, and created something that has become an iconic cultural artifact that everybody, pretty much everybody loves, everybody has seen, everybody can reference. So it worked.
Yeah.
Does it work? Did he manage to pull it off again? I guess is the question.
I think if you hadn't seen Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, and you just watch this completely blind, I think it does. I think it is very well pulled off. I think the characterization and the story and the quest works really well. And this genre, like fantasy adventure, is probably my favorite genre of film. I just love the journey and the character development and meeting all these crazy, quirky characters along the way and overcoming adversity. What did you think?
Well, I always liked it. I didn't love it. I mean, I had a whole series of films as a child that I loved to watch on VHS over and over again because, and get your violin out, I was a bullied child, Dan, if you can believe that or not. So I used to have this collection of films that I used to watch, particularly on a Sunday night. So sort of like when the death knell was ringing on the weekend and I knew I was going to have to go back to school. And looking back, a lot of them had similar themes. They were all about kids my age escaping into a fantasy world and having an adventure and being a hero and possibly never coming back. So
Never-ending Story.
Never-ending Story, The Last Starfighter, Return to Oz, Explorers, various films that actually are in the Oubliette, and we may come back to those because they're all childhood favourites of mine, and I'd be interested to watch them again with the nostalgia goggles firmly off. But Willow was never one of my top favourites. There are some things that I struggle with. I mean, Warwick Davis, He's achieved a lot, and hats off to him. But I have to say, I've never thought he was a particularly fine actor. I think he's gotten better. And I think we have to remember when he was given the title role in Willow, he was 17.
Yeah.
So it's a lot for him to carry on his shoulders. But I just feel as though the first 20 minutes of the movie is primarily in the Nelwyn village. And little people are rare, so casting is hard. I think it's the largest assemblage of little people ever put on film. I think there are 300 of them in the village scenes, which is amazing. And I believe Warwick Davis met his future wife there as well, which is there's lots of romance in this movie. But I just think the acting is just, I mean, probably the worst one is the prefect, Burble Cut, who's sort of his antagonist in the village, Willow's antagonist.
Oh, yeah.
And every single line reading of his is just terrible.
Sure. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
So you've got 20 minutes of bad line readings before the quest even begins. And it's 50 minutes before there's an action scene. So it takes a long time to get going. Once it gets going, once Mad Martigan is on the scene, Val Kilmer's character, and it's a series of captures and escapes and chases, I think it really does come into its own and it works a lot better. But I always feel as though it's sort of hamstrung by Warwick Davis being a little bit wooden. I mean, he's doing his best, but I don't necessarily believe him as a character.
Yeah, I don't think Warwick Davis was so bad, but I felt like his supporting cast was. I mean, at the start at least.
Yeah.
And they kind of made it worse. Definitely when Val Kilmer appeared, there was a lot more chemistry and like natural chemistry and humor, and it wasn't as clunky. There definitely were a lot of scenes towards the start that were just very drawn out, and I just wanted them to end.
Yeah. It's kind of a lesson in how much movie making has changed. I'm not sure a movie now would trust its audience's patience to go this long, because the film is 100. Well, I mean, movies are long now. I mean, these Avengers movies are 2 hours and 40 minutes or whatever. But and at the end of those, I just want them to end. But just in terms of storytelling, to go at this kind of pace and to build a world, which I think they do quite convincingly here. I think they do. Yeah. But yeah, to go 20 minutes, 50 minutes before the first action scene, which is the escape from the tavern, it's a long time to trust your audience to just get used to being in this world and being with this character.
Yeah, that's very true. And there are a lot of things in terms of the plot that just didn't seem to make sense. It was just very convenient, I guess.
Right.
Even the character that Joanne Whalley played, Saoirse.
Bav Morda's daughter, no less. So pretty evil.
Yeah, I mean, she was supposed to be evil, but I kind of had the kind of facepalm moment when she was just completely enamored by Val Kilmer's bravado that she suddenly changed sides. It just seemed a little bit completely implausible.
Yeah.
And the whole, damsel in distress thing, like, I was just, oh, no. I thought she was such a strong female lead sort of role, but then she ends up being all flaky and, just kiss me, Val.
She's not quite that bad.
I know.
She does sort of wander in a daze whilst staring at Val Kilmer's bravery in the courtyard. But finally, when she gets to the point where he doesn't know whether she's going to kill him or not, and she puts her sword to one side, grabs him by the armor, pulls him up and kisses him. So she's still very much has agency. She's still in charge. Yeah. She's calling the shots.
Sure.
And when she's kidnapped, she does punch him in the face, kick him in the groin and run away. So she still has some agency. And I think her character is actually missing a subplot. Tyrosline is where her father is, and the old man that you see frozen in the crystal
Yeah.
that they look at is actually her father. So she
No.
sort of finds out that her mother has frozen her father in rock.
No way. That would make much more sense.
It does. So
Her,
she
changing
realizes,
sides.
yeah, she realizes that her mother's. I mean, I don't know how it's a surprise to her that this woman that's murdering babies left, right, and centre is evil. But this comes as a shock to her when she finds out what she did to her father. And her father is actually at the end when everybody's got their new hairdos and they all look lovely.
What? No.
The old guy with the grey hair that stood behind her looking kindly and happy, that's her dad. But the whole subplot was excised just to try and bring the running time down, which is 126 minutes, but it does leave Saoirse without a very key piece of information that justifies her sudden change of heart.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So this is the Tyrosline sequence, which is my favourite sequence in the movie. I actually wish that were the finale because I think the combination... There are so many things happening in that scene with Val Kilmer trying to take on a whole army single-handed with booby traps, Willow battling trolls and accidentally creating a two-headed dragon that's just eating everybody, which is this wonderful stop-motion creation by Phil Tippett, which is, it's kind of hokey to look at it now, but it's beautifully, I mean, it's probably the finest example of stop motion. It's towards the end of stop motion's life in film, on the cusp of digital effects.
This film was kind of was very on the edge in terms of using a lot of traditional old school film techniques and effects as well as new stuff, and apparently it was the first film to use the computer effect known as morphing. And I think they even coined the term morphing.
They did. Yeah, so the digital branch of Industrial Light of Magic, they'd been experimenting and doing various things up until this point. So there was a stained glass window character in the young Sherlock Holmes movie that was a sort of their first attempt at a digitally rendered character.
Yeah.
But the morphing sequence where Willow transforms Finn Rizal back to her human form because Bavmord has cast a spell on her and turned her into, I don't know, what is she in the beginning? A possum?
Yeah, she. What is really hilarious, and I was just cracking up immensely. That possum is a very common possum in Australia.
Right.
It's actually a common brush-tail Australian possum, which you can, if I go outside tonight, I could probably spot one because they're very common.
Try talking to it. You never know.
Apparently it was quite bitey, and Warwick was terrified of it. And especially that scene where the possum is on his shoulder, he thought the possum was just going to bite his earlobes off. But there were quite a lot of scenes that he was actually pretty terrified of. The snow scene where they're sledding down the hill on a shield, they had to do it like 12 times, and each time was just as terrifying as the last, because he has a innate fear of roller coasters.
Right.
And this was pretty much a simulation of a roller coaster, really.
It was, yeah. It does fit into that 80s thing of people going down a bit of a roller coaster. Because I think you get the same thing with an inflatable raft in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And of course, you have the Goonies. You have just basically, they all just stop for 5 minutes to go down a water slide.
Yeah.
Which, is all good fun. I mean, that's one of the worst effects in the film, I think, is when you cut to wide shots of the sled going down the hill with supposedly Willow in it. I mean, it's so obvious that he's just a dummy that's rocking around. But that's fair enough.
I mean, the baby as well. There were two dummies they used for the action scenes for the baby. And one of them was just a dummy that didn't do anything. Another one was, I think they dubbed it like Roto Baby or Moto Baby or something. and it was a motorized baby that could, I think it turned its head from side to side. but apparently it was heavier than the actual baby, so it was really cumbersome to carry around. And once you are aware that it is a motorized baby, there are lots of scenes that look ridiculous because this baby's just going backwards and forwards very unnaturally. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't notice that. I mean, the baby is very good for all the hero shots where they focus on her face.
Oh, so good.
Because she does lots of things like eyebrow raises, and I don't know what they did. I guess they just had a second unit that just filmed the baby for an afternoon.
Yeah, I think
waited for her to do things.
Pretty much what they did. So after shooting, they'll just do a big chunk of just baby expressions. Props to the baby. I think it was they were twins that played the baby. Yeah. Probably one of the standout performances of the film, to be honest.
Yeah, it has to be said. I mean, one thing that we do try to touch on in our reviews is acting, and I have to say I've never been all that fond of Val Kilmer either.
Yeah.
As an actor, I find him a little bit arch and not terribly serious, but actually it works for Mad Martigan, I think, because I don't think he's a very serious guy.
No.
I think it works for him in this role because he is sort of an opportunist. And actually, you talk about Saoirse's change of heart being surprising. This sort of sudden scene where James Horner's music is swelling up, where somebody that used to fight alongside Mad Martigan is saying to Willow, he's a liar and a thief, and he won't stay with you. And Val Kilmer stands up and stands forward and says that he serves Willow, he serves the Nelwyn. And I think, well, that's great, it's beautiful, but why? I can't see why he does it.
That's another kind of plot kind of a point that I found in the film that didn't really make sense. Just a lot of decisions or changes of character that were convenient for the plot, but pretty implausible. Apparently Val Kilmer was great fun to work with, according to Warwick Davis. And he said that Val Kilmer was always just pulling pranks and telling jokes all the time. And often for a lot of the scenes where it would just be the shot of Warwick and Val would be on the other side, delivering lines. Val would be pulling faces and just kind of trying to make it more comical and more sort of easing the tension in terms of being on set. And apparently a lot of Val's lines were ad-libbed as well, and a lot of the things that he did were completely improvised.
Yeah. He does do a wonderful thing that I've only seen, I can only think of in another movie, which is Big Trouble in Little China with Kurt Russell, which is he plays a character who thinks he's fantastic, but he's actually not that great, and he doesn't mind playing that. I mean, with Big Trouble in Little China, it caused problems with the studio because they just didn't get Jack Burton.
Okay,
this guy that was just thought he was great, but he's actually pretty dumb and useless in most scenes. Like the whole finale of Big Trouble in Little China, he's passed out on the floor because he's fired a gun into the ceiling and the debris comes down and knocks him out.
Yeah.
And Mad Martigan has a touch of that too. Like he does this wonderful bit of sword play in the sort of snowy mountaintop camp while they're trying to escape from there. And Warwick Davis looks at him and says, "You are great."
Yeah.
And he looks satisfied with himself, twirls his sword, and then falls over.
Yeah.
But
I think that's so endearing, though.
It is. Yeah, he is the life of the film. I have to say, you've convinced me on that. I think he does bring it to life. That's why I probably do feel it for the first 20 minutes of the movie in the Nelwyn village. I'm waiting for Mad Martigan to arrive because he does more in terms of the bringing life and comedy to the film than the characters who I believe are meant to, which is the brownies.
Yeah, I mean, they were a bit hammy at times, or most of the time, but I quite liked them. I mean, I guess the thing that was most distracting was the blue screen effect to make them look small, which on DVD or Blu-ray looks horrible because it doesn't. They don't look in the scene at all. But I watched. I think it was the trailer or the little behind the scenes video of it, and I must have been a transfer from a VHS or something, but those scenes look really good on VHS.
Right, okay.
So I think at the time of release and when people were watching it on their home videos, you couldn't tell the difference.
No.
But on DVD or HD Blu-ray, it's very obvious.
It is, yeah. It really shows the limit. They were pushing optical compositing, the chemical version of it, in any case, to its limits at this point towards the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. And I think that's one thing, people argue about, CGI, it's so horrible. And I think in a lot of ways it is. It lazy, mass-produced CGI on characters and on matte paintings isn't quite as good as practical stuff. But when it comes to compositing, I think that's one thing that computers really have helped us to improve by a long way.
Yeah, I mean, they did a pretty good job. I saw some of the behind the scenes of the morphing scene when Willow is transforming Finn Rizal, and she goes from, I think, a goat to a ostrich to a peacock to a tortoise, to a tiger, and then finally to her human form. And it does look really obvious with the compositing, but if you watched what they had to work with, they did a pretty good job. I mean,
they did, yeah. I think, again, it's still chemically, optically composited into the film. But the morphing in itself was groundbreaking at the time, and there was one part of it that I really like, which is the tiger's head going down and her going down. There's lots of things happening there in terms of the way that its face collapses and changes. That's really interesting visually, and I could see why it dazzled people at the time.
Yeah,
it's only one short sequence.
Yeah, I mean, it took a lot of innovation to create that sequence, and I think after that everyone wanted to use morphing, and suddenly it was used in everything. Like the prime example I can think of is that Michael Jackson music video where he's morphing into all these people.
White.
Yeah, that one. I think that was the first time I remember watching it.
Which again was groundbreaking at the time, but now you look at it and it's kind of quaint.
Yeah, I mean, it became an effect that everyone used, and then no one wanted to use anymore.
Yeah,
because it was just everywhere.
Yeah,
but there were a lot of other effects that they did that were really well done. I did really like all the when they had all the close-ups of the brownies, the tiny little fairy dudes, and they had the giant sets. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Reminds me of, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
It's sometimes that's not done very well, the props, but the production design on this is uniformly, it's a lavish production. It does look great.
Yeah.
And I think if the brownies don't work in the movie, I think it's because they were just so divorced from the production. Like you say, with the chemistry with Warwick Davis and with Val Kilmer and Joanne Whalley, actually, works the scene in the hut where Val Kilmer's had a pixie love potion smacked in his face and falls in love with her temporarily. The comic interplay there is really very good, and I think the brownies struggled because they just clearly were never on set. They were just off filming on a giant set or in front of a blue screen, so there's just no chemistry there.
I mean, I think they were the last thing for them to film. I think they filmed everything, and then they filmed the brownies doing the blue screen stuff at the end. So they had literally nothing to work with. I mean, apart from they could watch the cuts thus far, but yeah, they didn't have anyone to work with. I thought, and you maybe disagree, but I thought Warwick Davies did really well in acting as if the brownies were there. I thought I thought that was really convincing.
Yeah, he does much better with his eye lines. The thing that bothers me with people trying to match eye lines in movies is quite often you can tell that a director has like held a tennis ball in front of them or whatever and said,
Yeah.
whatever it is you're looking at is here. And then the animator will move the object. The object will fly around them or jump off them or whatever.
Yeah.
And the actor just maintains the same eye line because they've been told to maintain this eye line and they're not following. Whereas I think Warwick was actually anticipating where the brownies would run. Like when you have the whole Gulliver's Travel scene where they've captured him and he's tied to the ground. And they're standing on him and running around him. He is actually trying to imagine that they're there and following them with his eye line, which I thought was, it is good.
One thing that I think Warwick Davis mentioned was Ron Howard was very, very good at directing actors because Ron was an actor. And so he could be really explicit with what he wanted. Whereas Warwick said that when he was on Star Wars with George Lucas, George is much more of a technical director. So he'll know technically what he wants, but he wouldn't be able to explain that to an actor, like act like this, act like that. It kind of was up to the actor to interpret his direction.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Harrison Ford is so just himself as Han Solo, because he could just do whatever he wanted as his character, as opposed to a director really pushing him in a specific direction.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I seem to remember that George Lucas was famous for having only one piece of feedback to actors, which was faster, more intense.
Right.
I think that's all he would ever say on the set of Star Wars. So much so there's an outtake where all of them are saying it to him because they know that it's coming. Yeah, so Ron Howard as a director, he's biting off a lot here. I'm not entirely convinced he pulls it off, but one area that I was surprised with looking back at it is just how good he is in coping with action. Because the Tear is Lean sequence, when you're following multiple characters doing multiple things and you're having to cut between various different action sequences and see this person is here, this thing is affecting that, this person's fired this catapult, it's gone there, this is where the monster is, this is where the troll is, and where the baby is at any given point, and you're following all of this. And it is such a fine example of 80s genre filmmaking at its finest, and it's the kind of thing that I get so annoyed with when I see modern films, because there will be action sequences where it is just edited by somebody with attention deficit disorder, and the director's approach will be, well, let's get it in a master shot and then just do some close-ups where I'm wiggling the hell out of the camera. And you've got no idea who is where, who is doing what.
Exactly.
So there's no payoff. This happens, and look, this is happening over here, and then they come together and wow, bang, that's really exciting. There's none of that. It's just a lot of shaking the camera and cutting once every 0.2 seconds. It's a really fine example of visual storytelling in action. It's the sort of thing that Raiders of the Lost Ark is so good at. It's the sort of thing that Lucasfilm and Spielberg were really famous for, I think.
Yeah, I thought that all the action sequences in Willow were incredible. Some of them were, I guess this film was it PG rated at the time?
Yeah, it is.
So a lot of the violence it's that real family fantasy violence where people were stabbed but you don't hear the stabbings, and often people just punched or kicked, and that's all it takes to subdue a person.
For them to fall over. There's no blood or beheadings. Still, the film was criticised for being a bit too dark for its target audience.
Yeah, there were two scenes, apparently, that were cut from the UK release. So the scene at the start where the the midwife is attacked by the death dogs, that scene was cut, and also the final killing scene of I can't remember the character's name, but I just see him as Skeletor.
Kale.
The guy with the skull face.
Kale, yeah,
Anyway,
he's named after the film critic Pauline Kael.
Yeah. Oh, right.
I don't know if that's
Interesting.
Lucas taking a stab at critics or honouring them. I don't know, but yeah, he's named after Kale, so that was cut as well.
Yeah, so that the killing scene of that where Mad Mardigan like steps on a sword and pulls Skeletor onto the sword. It's a pretty brutal scene.
It is, yeah. It's not subtle.
For a kids' movie, anyway.
Yeah, and I think the sequence where Bavmorda transforms everybody into pigs is
Oh,
pretty
horrifying.
disturbing.
It's horrifying. That's like, society level transformation scene. Pretty terrifying.
Although it does really annoy me, one of the things that bugged me even as a kid, there is a sequence where Willow comes out of the tent. He's been casting a spell to protect himself under the direction of Fin Raziel.
Yeah.
So he hasn't transformed into a pig. So he comes outside and finds a field full of pigs where
Yeah.
he once had an army. And there's a close-up where you look at two piglets. And I think to myself, please don't let that be supposed to be the brownies.
Yeah.
Because that is totally the wrong scale. They are far too big.
I know.
Even a micro pig would be far. There should be two small pigs optically composited into the scene because they're like 50 times larger than the brownies were. I don't know. I'm hoping it's not, but I'm trying to think who else it could have been.
Yeah, I think it was supposed to be the brownies.
Rubbish.
I don't know. Come on. It's a fantasy film. It started raining where I
Has
am.
it?
I don't know whether you can hear the rain.
No. So what did you make of, speaking of sound design, what did you make of the sound design in this movie? Because this is the work of the great Ben Burt.
Yeah, I was surprised because I normally love Ben Burt, but I felt like it seemed a bit makeshift to me. And there were a lot of things, even like the action scenes, and I think it was done deliberately because it was more catered towards family and the kind of the PG rating. So every time anyone got stabbed, it sounded either like someone tapping on a piece of wood or there was no sound at all.
Yeah.
So you didn't have that gut-wrenching, bloody sound with any of the fight scenes.
Yeah.
And a lot of the scenes, they opted to choose a comical sound
Right.
for something that should have not been comical. There's one scene where I think Mad Mardigan hits one of the henchmen with a shovel, and there's like a bell tone almost to it, and it's very comical. There's another scene where Fin Raziel has used her magic, and she's whipping around Bavmorda on the ceiling, and it's just this woof, 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 woof sound to it, which sounds ridiculous, but obviously if you went the actual, more authentic sounds, you would hear bones breaking and like blood splatter and that sort of thing, which is not really what you want in a kids movie.
No, and that seemed very reminiscent of Lord of the Rings. So the scene with, I think Christopher Lee makes Gandalf fly around the ceiling, doesn't he? And
Oh yeah.
yeah, I love that whole wizards duel, though. Witches in this case. I wish it went on for longer, actually. I really like the two of them sparring with each other.
I liked it how it started off using magic and then they just ended up punching each other in the face.
Yeah, it just turns into a bitchy face scratching session on the floor, doesn't it? It becomes comical.
Yeah.
But it starts off being really, quite intense and magical. And the scene where Fin Raziel thinks that she's bested Jean Marsh after throwing her against the walls, and she's got sort of part of her headdress over her face.
Yeah.
And she pulls it off, and then suddenly she roars and lurches toward the camera. Again, a little bit intense for kids,
Yeah.
I suspect.
It must have been nightmare material for kids.
I think so. And Jean Marsh had done this twice because she's a lovely British actress who was in a famous series here called Upstairs, Downstairs.
Oh, yes.
And all of a sudden she's in Return to Oz as an evil, witchy queen. And she's in Willow as this evil, and she's really relishing it. I mean, she does a fantastic job of it, I think.
She looks like she's enjoying herself.
Yeah. But that whole thing at the end with she's going to sacrifice the baby, and Laura Dannon's in like red and black bondage gear on an altar.
Yeah, I thought that another kind of plot point that just seemed a bit ridiculous. So she was doing a ritual to send the baby to another dimension. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, why not just
Kill it?
kill the baby? I mean, surely that's a much simpler solution to a full-blown ritual to send the baby to another dimension.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, there's a prophecy that this baby will cause your downfall. The baby does bugger all. She goes through this whole thing of creating this thing, that'll send somebody into another dimension, and lo and behold, stumbles it into it accidentally herself.
Yeah, it does.
Which-
it does kind of make the whole movie redundant because the baby doesn't do anything.
So the baby is basically like, what's the Hitchcockian word?
MacGuffin.
MacGuffin.
No.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did like how you expected Willow to kind of win at the end by throwing the acorn. You kind of expected it, like, when's he going to throw the acorn? When's he going to throw the acorn? And I liked it when he did throw the acorn and it didn't do anything and it didn't defeat the queen, and he defeated the queen by doing something that he does. He did that silly magic trick where he makes the pig disappear at the start, and so he does that same trick to make the baby disappear. And I liked it because it meant that he defeated the queen himself.
Yeah.
With his own abilities and him as a Nelwyn, and not him as a sorcerer with some magic acorn
That somebody else has given him.
I thought that was quite cool.
Yeah, it is, and it ties all the way back to what Billy Barty, who's the sort of high grand wizard who's looking for an apprentice every year, and his test for the applicants is different each time. But in this case, he holds up his hand and says, "In which finger contains the power to control the universe," or whatever. And they all pick a finger, and he shakes his head. And Willow hesitates, but then finally picks a finger and also fails. And Billy Barty says to him, "What was your initial instinct?" Later on, he says, "What was your initial instinct?" And he said, "To pick my own finger." And he said that was the right answer. Trust your instincts. When you go on this journey, trust your own instincts. And I think that's sort of what the underlying message of the film is. You're not going to get some Deus Ex Machina magic sword or whatever that's going to solve your problems. You have to use your own ingenuity and use your own skills and abilities, which is it's a nice message to end on, I think.
Yeah, and it's also nice. It's also good to know that Willow was the one that was responsible of saving the day. It wasn't Mad Mardigan. It wasn't Finn Rizal. It was Willow, and it was great.
Yeah.
Coming to you live from the movie Oubliette Theatre, it's the prestigious Mobley Awards.
All right, so it's time to pick our nominations for various great categories. Let's start with favourite quote. Do you have a favourite quote from Willow, Dan? There are quite a few.
There were quite a few. There weren't as many very unique quotes, but there was one. Okay, so they're in this tavern. It's this very dirty, filthy tavern, and Mad Mardigan is dressed as a woman in disguise, and because he's obviously had an affair with some woman, And so the woman's husband comes in, and he's dressed in as a woman, and then he goes, oh, there's another woman here. So he goes, he steps up to her and he says, wanna breed? And then Val Kilmer says, tempting, but no.
That's my favorite as well. And it's actually become a favorite between my brother and I, because we quite often say, tempting, but no, to each other. It's lived on, that particular line.
It's a great line. I think it's something that all men should use as a pickup line. No.
Most 80s moment. Is there a definitively 80s moment in Willow?
I find a lot of 80s fantasy and sci-fi, there's always blue lightning everywhere. So there's a scene where the queen is getting struck by lightning, and I just thought, this is like Highlander. This is like a Highlander moment. Just like a big bolt of lightning, blue lightning, and just everything's blue. Yeah, and it's a very such a prevalent thing in a lot of fantasy. In the final climactic scene, there's always thunder and lightning. No matter what, there's always going to be thunder and lightning.
Yeah. I think mine would be the let's stop the movie to do a roller coaster ride on a sled. I think that just seemed to crop up in a lot of 80s movies.
Oh, yeah.
I have no idea why.
That scene was funny because they were just going down the hill and suddenly it looked like the best ski field in the world. And they were just going through all these kind of locales on this beautiful mountain. And I actually thought, are they in the Swiss Alps right now? But no, they were in Queenstown, New Zealand. I should have recognized it.
Indeed, yeah.
I wanted to ask, what was your favorite special effect?
My favorite special effect would probably be the morphing scene.
Oh yeah.
I think it's groundbreaking, and I think it has to get a nod just for being the first example of its kind, I think.
Yeah. My favorite special effect is when Willow turns the troll into the two-headed dragon. Right. And it just kind of dissolves and becomes just this pile of fur pretty much.
Yeah.
And then all of these tentacle intestines spring out of it. And turn it inside out into this goopy ball, and then two little dragon heads emerge from it. I thought that was a pretty amazing effect.
It is, yeah. You don't know where it's going either.
Yeah, I know. I thought, and then suddenly it drops into the water and grows into this giant two-headed dragon. An amazing effect. Was that stop motion or was that like animatronics? How did they even do that?
The initial transformation or the whole?
Yeah, the initial transformation.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. So there's stop motion with the tentacles, then the two-headed thing emerging, I think, is a puppet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a multi-stage thing. It's very 80s as well. That you see one effect, you cut to Willow's reaction, then you cut back and it's changed.
Yeah.
Technique into something else. Yeah, it's a good sequence. The whole Tyrosline sequence is great.
Fantastic.
So best hair.
Apparently everyone was just wearing wigs.
Yeah, even Willow, which surprised me.
Saoirse's hair was just radiant in a cascade of red curls.
Yeah, which means that she looks great when she's holding a Laura Dannon, who is my vote for best hair, just because she's a few-month-old baby and she's got a fulsome head of curly red hair, which apparently was glued on with syrup every day because they couldn't use glue because it would hurt her poor little head. Favorite scene?
Tyrosline scene was so much going on, so that scene was definitely my favorite.
I have a favorite moment, and I don't know what it is. I can't describe why it is, but it's when Shalindria is talking to Willow in the woods. She disappears for a moment, and Willow's sort of prevaricating about whether he wants to be on this quest or not. And all of a sudden, Shalindria reappears, but enormous.
Yeah.
So it's just her face, and it's just advancing through the trees, and there's all this interactive light passing through the trees, and she's staring him down and saying, Elora Danan must survive.
Yeah.
And it's so serious, and it always makes the hair stand up on the back of my head.
Yeah.
I have no idea why. It's a great performance and a great effect, and
Yeah.
it really does hammer home. This is important. There's real jeopardy here.
It was a very cool effect as well. So they suspended the actress, and they did the whole music video thing where they play the scene like sped up, and then they slow it down, so everything looks very fluid with her movements.
Yeah, it's a real fantastic fantasy moment, and it always gets me every time I watch it.
I did really like the scene where Willow is battling. It looks like, I don't know, like a coal stand or something, but it's full of bones for some reason.
What is that thing? I don't know where the hell Bavmorda shops for her furniture. That's just crazy.
But it was a very cool effect. Was that stop motion?
I think it is, yeah.
And then it was blue screened on, composited. I thought it was very well choreographed because, again, Warwick had nothing to act in front of, and he does a good job.
Yeah, I think he does well. And finally, sound effect. And as per usual, I have a nomination for worst sound effect.
Yeah, I have a nomination for inexplicable sound effect. So there's a scene where Mad Mardigan is in the crow cage, but they haven't met it. So the Nelwyns are just having a rest at the crossroads, and they've got the baby, and they haven't met Mad Mardigan yet. And then there's this kind of wailing siren sound.
Oh, yeah.
And it's never explained.
No.
Because suddenly Mad Mardigan's there, and surely he couldn't have made that sound because it sounded like it was coming from like the distance.
Yeah, I was waiting for Obi-Wan Kenobi to turn up.
Yeah, I don't know. Was it just purely a sound to make you feel on edge as
I think
the
so.
audience? And then not explain it whatsoever.
No. I think it's supposed to be they're out in the woods far away from home and there are monsters out here. I don't know. It's very odd.
Yeah, it was very odd because it wasn't a night scene either. It was like a day scene, so it didn't have that creepy like oh it could be a wolf or something. It was just wasn't explained.
Random howling. For me, it's the fact that the Wilhelm scream
Is used
3 times,
3 times
in the movie. It's
I
fair
noticed
enough
that
that
as
the
well.
Wilhelm scream is in Lord of the Rings once in each movie. And you think that's fair enough because it's an in-gag. It's a 3-hour movie. It happens once. You go, oh, there it is. But
I have
3
never
times.
in the life of me heard the Wilhelm scream twice in a movie.
Yeah.
Normally once is the quota, It's funny, it's a gag, everyone gets it. But 3 times,
Yeah.
I blame George Lucas for it because I bet he was the instigator for that. Because I mean, it's in all of his films, right? It's in all the Star Wars movies, it's all the Indiana Jones movies. Yeah, so I just blame George Lucas.
Okay. And that's the end of the Moobly Awards.
What I was really impressed with the film was it was very ambitious in terms of just the sheer scale of some of the sets. Like the 2 castles were insanely amazing, especially the final castle. Apparently the entire castle was a set that they had to build in some quarry somewhere.
In New Zealand, I think.
It's the last castle? No, I thought the last castle was in England.
It says here, good old trusty Wikipedia, it says here, Tongariro National Park. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
No, that is correct.
In New Zealand was chosen to house Bavmorda's castle. So the quarry must be there. I wonder if is it the same place that they did Helm's Deep, I wonder?
I can't remember.
No, because that was a quarry as well, if I recall.
Yeah. There was, and Mordor was also a quarry.
Yes.
Mordor was actually in Wellington, and it was above a highway.
Oh, right,
So
okay.
you could drive past Mordor every day if you wanted to. And many people did. Yeah, so I was really impressed by just the sheer ambition of Willow, and even the battle scenes. Like, that's a lot of extras.
Yeah.
The army scenes, they were all just extras. It's really nice seeing actual people in crowd scenes again, as opposed to crowd scenes now. It's all just duplicates.
It is.
CGI.
And the thing with CGI is they go too far. So you end up with, here's a crowd of 3 billion. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it's all just like CGI dots, really.
Yeah. And you know it's fake. So your brain just, the scale just doesn't impress you because computer graphics show. Whereas a scene with like 500 extras looks really impressive.
I mean, obviously, there were a few scenes where you could tell we're just looking at 5 people all on horseback on close-ups. But I don't know. I would rather prefer to see actual people as extras rather than CGI crowds. Also, it was really nice to see real smoke again because I can't stand CGI smoke. CGI smoke and CGI mist. There's something about it that just doesn't. It's not convincing to me.
No.
But yeah, there was a lot of smoke in a lot of the scenes. I especially love the last battle scene where there's smoke and there's rain, and then there's a few shots kind of looking up at Mad Mardigan, and it's blue sky. So you can tell it's actually a pretty nice day, and they've just got a million hoses raining down on everyone.
Yeah, not as easy to fix back then as it would be now. I mean, in terms of criticisms of the film, there are some things we've talked about that I just don't understand, like Mad Martigan's whole motivation and Saoirse's without her key plot line. I mean, one thing that really always bugged me was the whole business of the dust of broken hearts. So the brownies have this fairy dust that that if you inhale it, or I don't know, get punched in the face with it seems, you fall in love with. And I think I'm right. They say the next person you see, isn't that? Yeah.
Well, yeah. And then of course Mad Mardigan sees Willow as the first person and doesn't fall in love with Willow.
Doesn't fall in love with Willow or the brownies. Or Finn Rizal. He waits until he gets into Saoirse's tent and then falls in love with her. So even
very convenient.
Very convenient. So even if it's you fall in love with who you are normally sexually attracted to, gender-wise, and species-wise, which isn't true because one of the brownies falls in love with a cat. So if it's just gender, then he should have fallen in love with Finn Rizal or Elora Danan, which would have been really creepy. It's nearly as bad as that werewolf guy in the Twilight movies that's in love with a baby.
I didn't watch them because I couldn't get past the first one.
I couldn't get past the first one either. I just heard about it, but it's couldn't bring myself to try. But yeah, it's so that whole thing. But I mean, the scene is so fun anyway that I think it's I think it is fine.
I heard that they shot that scene again because the first time they shot it, Val and Joanne were not a couple. And then the second time they shot it, Ron thought there's going to be a lot more chemistry now because they are a couple. Okay. And there was quite a lot of sexual tension in that scene. That was very genuine.
Yeah, I think Val's delivery of his line, "Your touch is worth 100,000 deaths," is actually it's. I mean, he's hamming it up because he's under a spell or whatever, but actually, it's quite moving, and a lot of that is because of James Horner's score. I don't know if we want to talk about.
Oh, James Horner's score was beautiful.
It is. I mean,
it really carried the film.
It does. Yeah.
A lot of scenes that were quite clunky were pushed through because of the score.
Yeah.
I did think at the start, but now that in hindsight, I think it was just bad acting. So the whole Nelwyn Village thing at the start, I felt that the score was too present. There was too much score in that scene, but it was probably to cover up the bad acting and line delivery.
Yeah, I think it is. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a glorious, big, full-bodied 80s symphonic fantasy score. London Symphony Orchestra, King's College Choir from Cambridge,
Yeah.
close to my heart, and shakuhachi.
It was a shakuhachi.
Yeah, feature solo
Interesting.
instrument. Yeah.
Because I thought it was, but I thought, what's a Japanese instrument doing this medieval fantasy? But it makes sense though. I mean, often a lot of scores, especially more fantasy scores, they will employ some sort of strange instrument to carry it along, and because the listeners, the audience are not used to that sort of timbral sound, and yeah, it really worked. It's very breathy, lots of sort of tonal falls and stuff with the instrument. Very well done. Very well
It
done.
is, and they use it in a lot of interesting and experimental ways as well, which I think is interesting. It does add a real character to the film. I mean, I think the score is guilty of James Horner's famous or infamous danger motif,
Okay.
which is used for Bavmorda and her army. So it's the brassy motif where it goes diddle-da,
Ah, right.
which, if you sort of follow through all of James Horner's scores, you will find diddle-da in there.
Okay.
In quite a few of them.
I found some of the little motifs in Willow were quite similar to Star Wars as well.
Right.
So
okay.
the whole, brass to symbolize evil is quite similar to some of John Williams' stuff he did for Star Wars. Yeah, the score is great.
It is, yeah. I think scores in fantasy films deserve a lot of praise because they have to create a world that the audience will recognize and go along with, and cover up and paper over and join together a lot of, frankly, weird shit on screen.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's really a place where I find lots of score artists like Jerry Goldsmith and James Horner and John Williams, all the J's, just excelled themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel there is a lot more characterization that is conveyed with score. There are themes that symbolize, the good guys and the bad guys, and there's a lot more to play with, and it can be quite overt as well. It's almost better if it is overt, whereas with all these Marvel movies, everything just is either an ominous tone or just jarring percussion, and that's all they need.
Yeah, the Marvel movies, I think, are quite famous for having entirely failed to create a good score.
No themes whatsoever.
No, and you've got an opportunity to build an entire universe, and you're using cut and paste,
Copying other scores that are just copying other scores that are just copying other scores. So everything's just a big smush of nothing memorable.
Oh yeah, just ostinatos and percussion and sound design.
Now it's time for random trivia.
Okay, as usual, Dan has a random trivia moment for us.
So originally, one of my random trivia moments has already been said by you, Conrad.
Whoops, sorry.
Originally, it was going to be the hair on Elora's head being glued on with syrup. I have another one. The pig that Willow is using to plow the fields somehow.
As one does,
Was called Rambo.
Rambo.
And apparently was very feisty and would continuously just run off. And the handlers would just be chasing this ginormous pig in the fields. Yeah. Okay, people, now it's time for the final verdict for Willow. And what do you think, Conrad?
Well, I think this film does deserve to be watched. I do think it's a fine example of 80s fantasy escapist adventure, and I think it puts a lot of films that are foisted upon children today to shame. I think it's convincingly creates a fantastic world. It's got really vivid characters, some fantastic action set pieces, some innovative effects for the time. I think it holds up, and I think at the end of the 126-minute running time, you really do feel like you've been on an adventure with this character.
I think as well. I think there are a lot of fantasy films that came out in the 80s that are hoisted up a lot more compared to Willow, and I feel that Willow deserves to also be on that same level with Neverending Story and Dark Crystal and Princess Bride. I think it's better than The Princess Bride. I know everyone will hate me for saying that, but I really do. I think it has more interesting characters, better action sequences, more innovative and interesting effects as well. I like that it used a culmination of lots of different optical effects, practical effects, computer effects to make it much more magical and fantastical. And also, seeing it on VHS would have been more effective, because seeing it on DVD or Blu-ray, you can really see the effects and you know when it's happening.
Yeah,
but I still think
that's the
holds
problem
up.
with DVD and Blu-ray and now 4K. I mean, it's like with Star Wars, the garbage mats around the edges of spaceships. You can actually see the squares that are sort of drawn around. But you wouldn't have seen that on VHS. So I think, it would have been good.
There are definitely still some flaws in this movie, plot points and some characterizations that don't make any sense. But overall, I love the characters. I think the characters are very endearing. And I do feel a huge sense of achievement at the end. And it's a nice conclusion.
Yeah.
And also great starting point for Warwick Davis' career as well, because this was his first role where you could actually see his face and it wasn't covered up with makeup or a big fuzzy Ewok head, you know.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot to put on his shoulders, and I think he's been under makeup, as Leprechauns and Professor Flitwick and so on ever since. In those roles, he always manages to make a character shine through all of the prosthetics and fur. I think in this one, it's a bit of a challenge for him as a 17-year-old to be the leading man and be in pretty much every scene. And I think you're right. I think he gets better when he has somebody to play off of who is
an actual actor.
An actual actor rather than. I think you could probably trim down the first 20 minutes in the Nelwyn village and get the story going a little faster.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think the pacing is pretty good once it gets going.
Yeah. I also thought production design wise, incredible. Incredible costume designs, incredible set pieces and props, very convincing. Also, location, beautiful, of course, beautiful New Zealand, but also the other forest scenes in England and Wales, really well done and very well put together with the matte paintings as well.
Yeah. It's great to see lots of location shooting. There's nothing more expansive and there's nothing that feels more like you're going on an adventure than watching somebody taking a trek across a vast landscape.
Yeah.
And it's something that New Zealand did really well in here and in the Chronicles of Narnia and in Lord of the Rings, but not The Hobbit, which looks like a cramped studio blue screen movie.
The entire movie looks like it's set in a CGI world. It doesn't look like New Zealand at all.
Exactly. It's terrible. And I think it's one of the things that makes films like Willow really shine is this sense that you really are out in the elements in these fantastic locations.
Yeah, yeah. and often very uncomfortable locations. All the muddy scenes were apparently very grueling for Warwick, being only 3 foot tall or whatever.
Yeah, and I feel sorry for Val Kilmer with his open shirt wandering around in the snow.
Apparently they had to, where they shot it, there was only one road to go up there, and most of the time the only way they could get up there was using helicopters.
Right.
And every time there would be a storm or a whiteout, they would have to evacuate the set and leave the mountain. And all the night scenes in that scene, they just had to do in the studio because it was far too cold at night to actually.
Oh gosh,
act.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter, does it really? Because you can't see anything anyway.
Yeah,
it's a lavish production, and it's beautifully done, I think.
Right, so it's that time where we set the movie free.
We do, so away it should go.
Run, little guy, run!
Oh, off he goes. Look at him run. He's so happy. So I guess the only thing now is for us to decide what we're going to pull out of the oubliette next time.
Well, for next time, I thought we'd go down under to Australia and take a look at the Aussie film from 1984, Razorback.
Wow. I have not seen Razorback.
Well, like I always say, you're in for a treat.
Okay, I will look forward to that. So thanks for joining us for another episode of Movie Oubliette. I hope everyone enjoyed our trip into childhood nostalgia with Willow.
Childhood nostalgia.
Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Tell us what you think of Willow, whether you agree with us releasing Willow into the wild, and tell us what sort of films you think we should be looking at next, etc. We are on Twitter and Instagram as Movie Oubliette. And if you don't know how to spell Oubliette, that's
Oubliette.
So was it I can't remember. What was that?
Oubliette.
Okay, I think that's clear now. So yes, join us in the dungeon next time on Movie Oubliette.
And if you can, please give us a star rating on iTunes or wherever else they give star ratings. And a good review too, because you love us, right?
Yeah, you do. You know you do. Okay, so join us in the dungeon next time on Movie Oubliette. I'm Conrad.
I'm Dan.
Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
We review the films others tend to forget. Come with us and open up the Movie Oubliette.
Tempting, but no.